are not going back.
Make America great again.
Hello, and welcome to the Rotunda's Election Eve special, coming to you live from French Hall here at Longwood University in Farmville, Virginia. Whether you've just fallen out of a coconut tree or simply existing in the context, thank you for joining us today. Tomorrow at 6 a.m., polls across Virginia will open as voters make their final decisions in an election that has grown increasingly close in the final days. Today we'll go over the current state of the election, the race for the presidency, the fight for Congress, as well as discuss local races here in Farmville. We'll bring on a special guest to talk about how the candidates have made their case to voters and talk about how to vote if you have not done so yet. We'll have two live streams, one going on YouTube and one on Instagram, and feel free to drop questions about the election for us to answer. With that, let's get right into it. For all intents and purposes, the presidential race is tied nationally. Kamala Harris leads by 1% according to the 538 polling average nationally. However, in the United States, we do not elect the president based on the national vote. We elect presidents with the Electoral College. Candidates must garner 270 electoral votes to win. Virginia has 13 electoral votes compared to 54 and 40 for California and Texas, respectively, all the way to 3 electoral votes for states such as Wyoming, Vermont, and others. Maine, interestingly, and Nebraska split theirs based on congressional district. That said, not all electoral votes and not all states are sought after equally. If all of the lean, likely, and safe states remain in their columns, Kamala Harris goes into election night with 275 electoral votes, and Donald Trump goes in with 219. However, as you can see, the race is not decided in the states in red or blue, but those in yellow. Listed by most electoral votes to fewest, Pennsylvania with 19, Georgia with 16, North Carolina with 16, Michigan with 15, Arizona with 11, Wisconsin with 10, and Nevada with 6. There's also one district in Nebraska, the 2nd district, that is highly sought after by both campaigns. Currently, polling averages of all 7 states show less than a 3% gap between the candidates. Kamala Harris leads in both Michigan and Wisconsin polling by 0.8 in both. Trump leads in Pennsylvania by 0.2%. These 3 states are sometimes called the Blue Wall, and all voted reliably Democratic before 2016. However, in 2016, Donald Trump narrowly defeated Hillary Clinton in all 3, and both parties have fought hard over them since. After that point, Trump currently leads in all the remaining battlegrounds. In Pennsylvania and Arizona, Trump leads by 0.5 and 2.6 percentage points. Moving into the Southeast, Trump leads by 1.5 percentage point in Georgia, and in North Carolina, Trump leads by 1.2 percentage points. What is important to remember is that all but one of these states, North Carolina, voted for Joe Biden in 2020. Alternatively, all of them but Nevada voted for Donald Trump in 2016. What is even more important to remember is that polling is often not accurate. Polling overestimated Democrats in 2020 and 2016 and overestimated Republicans in 2012 and 2022. At the end of the day, however, the final decision is made by the voters. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll sit down with a special guest to go over how the candidates have made their case to the voters. We'll be right back with the In Case You Missed It Election Eve special. Welcome back, everybody. Joining us today, Associate Professor of Communication Studies, currently teaching political communication, great class, by the way, and one of our amazing Rotunda advisors, Dr. Ryan Stouffer. How are you doing today?
I am fabulous. I must say, as an advisor of Rotunda Studios, I am so proud of you all for going live here. This has been fun. You've been off to a great start here, and of course, the behind-the-scenes crew taking care of everything here too. So I'm doing wonderful. Happy to participate here today.
Yeah, shout out to all our behind-the-scenes crew today. They're working overtime making this all happen. So, like I said, you teach political communication, Com 313. I want to get your take on how Democrats have adapted. This has been an unprecedented election. I guess all of them are now. There's been this late stage shift from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris. How do you think messaging has changed for the Democrats?
That's a fascinating question here, and it's been such an interesting change because I think number one is basically now I have no words. Basically, adapting to social media, right? Making this a social media friendly campaign now. The DNC gave credentials to 200 content creators to go and cover the DNC. And these are social media influencers. I mean, some of them are doing dance videos, some of them are doing food, a few of them are doing political content, but most of them were not. Yeah. And so I think the DNC realizes their pathway to victory. The Democrats, they realize their pathway to victory is through young folk. And so I think they've embraced social media in a way that you did not see under Joe Biden. I saw under Joe Biden a very classic campaign. I mean, let's, make sure we're hitting our TV spots, our ads, things like this. And again, I think that's the biggest difference they've seen once Kamala took that nomination is kind of embracing that social media content. I think the other thing we've seen here, especially in the last 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks now, is often when Kamala first came on, she was being criticized from many Republicans by never doing TV interviews, right? And we've seen that in the last 3 weeks. She is doing everything, right? We got Call Her Daddy, we got podcasts, we got Joe Rogan. No, she didn't go on Joe Rogan yet. Obviously, that's probably not going to happen at this point. She did Fox News. We got some 60 Minutes, some other podcasts there. So I think embracing shorter form communication and also embracing alternate forms of media. Not that those are small forms of media now, but not traditional forms of media.
And so do you think by doing things like that with content creators and trying to appeal to young voters, do you think Kamala Harris runs the risk of making her campaign too online? How do you think, do you think that she's kind of campaigned well and marketed herself well to the older voters? Maybe not necessarily the ones on TikTok, but the ones that spend their time on Facebook.
That is a great question. I don't know. I think we're at a weird spot in American information consumption. So I'm actually going to throw this back to you in a second. We as Americans seem to want the shortest possible bits of information, right? Often you heard the critique of Harris that, she doesn't provide any details. Donald Trump has never provided any specific policy details other than mass deportations, tariffs, things like this. They're very general concepts. We don't get any details. We seem to be okay with him talking like that. It doesn't seem to be okay for Harris to talk like that. There's an 86-page PDF on her website that goes into detail of everything she's going to want to do or everything she proposes doing, right? If she gets elected, if she gets Congress, et cetera, et cetera. So I think she does not, because I think Americans in general, they don't want that in-depth, right? They want that 30-second short-form soundbite, whether they're older or younger. I still think they want that. So I still think you see that playing out in political ads that just give us the top-line detail, and I think you're still seeing that play out in short-form media where the American people don't want that long in-depth. So I don't think she's going to risk alienating older voters because of that. But I'm curious, what do you think of that as somebody in the Gen Z demographic?
Well, I think it comes down to with younger voters. I think primarily Kamala Harris's not problem, but her challenge is turnout. Because for a long time, I guess that's improved recently. They're saying Gen Z voters are voting kind of a lot more than young voters have before. But I guess when it comes to Gen Z and when it comes to younger voters, it's a battle of turnout. But when it comes to the older voters, it's a battle of convincing. Because the older voters are the ones who vote in I voted in the 2016 primary, the 2016 election. I voted in 2017, 18, 19, 20. And so I guess, I don't know. I guess what the Harris campaign has to do is kind of make sure that they're marketing themselves correctly to both demographics to make sure that you're not, maybe you're marketing yourself to Gen Z, but maybe you're trying to keep away some of the content that you've seen with these content creators. Maybe you're trying to keep them away from the older voter, the coal miners, the union voters, where you need to start marketing the 86-page economics. But I guess when push comes to shove, when it comes down to policy, do you think people are reading 86-page economic policies?
No, and that's where I think our electorate has changed a bit, probably for the worse. But if you think about like what Harris appeals to, young voters essentially, I think her challenge is to separate herself from Biden and talk about how she's different. And I don't think she's done a great job with that, right?
Yeah.
At one point she said, I wouldn't have changed anything. We all should be changing and growing, so I didn't love that. And then, so I think that's her challenge, to separate herself from older voters. I think it's all economics, right? The other problem is the hidden factor of sexism in this race.
Yeah.
There was an amazing interview, I think it was on CNN. The reporter was at an African American barbershop in Atlanta and asking the barber, like, hey, would you vote for Harris? And he's like, and she's like, are you just not comfortable for voting for a woman for leadership? He's like, yeah, I don't know. I'm married. I don't want to say.
Yeah.
And then she asked the man in the chair, like, would you feel comfortable? And then the barber thought about this for about 20 more seconds, like, wait a minute. I'm married, but my wife runs the household. So maybe if she can run the household, a woman can run the country. And so I think that we have this latent sexism in our country and thinking that women cannot be leaders, which I don't know how you campaign about that. I honestly think she's taken a good approach by frankly kind of ignoring it, because I think by justifying you give it weight. And so I think she's been smart with that. So I think she has to separate herself from Biden for a certain demographic, make sure she can lead as a woman for another demographic, and then how are we going to get inflation down and make home buying more affordable for another demographic. So I think she's done a decent job of appealing to all those, but obviously there's still room to go, especially, and I don't know how you overcome that sexism hurdle.
Well, and I mean, it's the kind of unfortunate fact of American politics that there's I think they were talking about it the other day in one of the lightning talks that they had, was like looking presidential in film and TV. It was Dr. McGill, I believe. And unfortunately, I didn't make it to that one, but it poses an interesting question about whether the American electorate views a woman as presidential. Should they? Yes. Do they is an entirely different question.
Yeah.
And I think you've kind of seen it with the way that Kamala Harris has run her campaign, or her campaign staff have run her campaign, has been so different to how Hillary Clinton's campaign worked. Because Hillary Clinton's election night watch party was under a giant glass ceiling in the Javits Center in New York, and it's the other day there was I think it was a CNN reporter as well, asked Kamala Harris, how, do you believe that women voters are going to decide this election? And she refused to say. She said, I believe the quote was, I think all voters matter. I think all voters are going to decide this election. And so it's super interesting that even the appeals to, I think part of the thing that she's trying to do is kind of hope. There was a poll the other day in Iowa that showed Kamala Harris leading in a red state, and one of the biggest things that they talked about was the state's abortion ban that went into effect over the summer, and that there is a very real part of the electorate, both men and women, who are still really upset about Dobbs.
Yeah.
And so I guess, do you think the Harris campaign is hoping that the effect of Dobbs is kind of doing the work for her in terms of appealing to that demographic?
100%, yes. I think that's their strategy. And you brought up Clinton. I think that's interesting, right? Clinton, and I hate saying America's not ready for a female president, because I think that's total BS here. And again, it shows you the latent sexism in our culture, right, in our society here. But I think there's definitely an issue with that with Clinton, but also Clinton with the name. And everything the American public knew Bill and Hillary for, I think, kind of tanked her candidacy. She was also very rich, very out of touch, right?
Yeah.
The deplorables comment, all this kind of stuff here. And so I think you get those two factors there. So I think that's one of the biggest differences we've seen since 2016 with a woman running for president is the Dobbs decision, right?
Yeah.
We've seen every time I think abortion has been on the ballot since then. It has surpassed polling, and it's been voted on in favor of more reproductive freedom and choice. And so I'm looking at Florida has a reproductive rights amendment on the ballot here. In Florida, you need 60% of the voters to pass any citizen-driven amendment. I don't think abortion's ever gotten above 57% in any of the other cases we've seen on the ballot recently. So I'm really curious to see how Florida turns out. But I think, yes, I mean, as a father of a daughter, as a husband to a wife, like, this is not the same issue for me as it is for them, obviously, but still a significant issue that boils down to freedom. And so I think you're going to see a lot more women turn out. And maybe that's why, to your point, I hadn't thought about that. Maybe that's why Harris doesn't address that so much, because we have this one linchpin, freedom issue on the ballot here that she might not need to address.
Florida also has on the ballot legalization of marijuana, I believe. It might be medical marijuana, but I'm pretty sure it's recreational marijuana in Florida. So I guess abortion and weed are kind of the deciding factors. Another state that I believe has both abortion rights enshrined in the Constitution and legal marijuana is Michigan.
Ah, nice segue, yes.
Nice segue. I know. I'm proud of myself for that one. So you're a Michigan native.
I am.
And so Michigan, one of the core 3 blue wall states, one of the closest in the country. I think she was leading it by 0.8.
Yeah.
I first want to get your take on Dearborn.
Yeah.
And so there's, back during the primary, there was in the Democratic primary, uncommitted won Dearborn over Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Would you mind, first, for those who don't know at home, and obviously this is closer to you as someone from Michigan, would you mind breaking down Dearborn a little bit?
Dearborn is a very cool town. Dearborn is where Henry Ford, right, of the Ford Motor Company, had one of his first mass assembly facilities here, the Rouge plant. It's still there and operating today. And so Dearborn, in order to have enough workers, Henry Ford brought a lot of went recruiting to the Middle East and brought a lot of Arab citizens over to work. A lot of Lebanese who are of Christian descent, actually. And so Lebanon was kind of in the middle of a long-time civil war. So you had a lot of Arabs of Christian descent come over to Dearborn. A Muslim population has followed them too. But Dearborn, I do believe, is the only Arab majority city in the U.S. or one of the largest Arab majority cities in the U.S. So the Gaza war, that has touched home for a lot of population in Dearborn because they have family relatives there too. So Dearborn's interesting. There's no Sharia law, nothing like that. I'll never forget one of the times I was in Farmville wearing my Tigers hat. Someone's like, "Oh, isn't Dearborn by Detroit? That's where they have Sharia law." Like, no. It's democracy, same as other. You can get amazing food there. People are very friendly. It's great, but obviously some different beliefs there. So I believe about 100,000 people in Michigan voted uncommitted in the Democratic primary because they did not agree with Joe Biden's support of Israel. And so I'm very curious to see what this population is going to do. Kamala has come out and said, you know what, that we need peace and prosperity for both sides. Okay, great, I agree with the sentiment, but it's kind of an empty thought, really, right? Because on the other hand, Trump has come out and said he thinks Netanyahu, the leader of Israel, didn't go far enough. Yeah. And he would give him a free hand. So I cannot imagine there's a world where these 100,000 voters who view the Gaza-Israel situation as one of their primary issues, most of them are not, I've seen some polling, are not single issue voters. Yeah. Right? They still value the economy, reproductive rights, all these things, the border, they still matter. So while that might be a top issue, most of them are not single issue voters. So I have to imagine they are going to vote for Harris. Now, Stein is going to probably get more votes in Michigan. RFK Jr. is still on the ballot in Michigan. I don't think he would take some of those voters, but I think Jill Stein might. So I honestly don't think Michigan's going to be as close as we think. I think Harris will probably take Michigan a little bit more comfortably than we think. I've seen it was a CNN article this morning. The Democrats have some internal polling that last-minute voters who decide in the last minute, so voters who have decided in the last 10 days, are overwhelmingly breaking for her. Yeah. Now, it is internal party Democratic polling, but still, I think we've seen this Puerto Rican comment for some reason resonate, more than anything we've seen Trump make in a while. There's not a huge Puerto Rican population in Michigan, but I have to believe the uncommitted voters who voted uncommitted in the primary out of Dearborn. And it's interesting also, Hamtramck is also an immigrant majority city. It's surrounded by Detroit. It's a little weird dot in the middle of the city of Detroit. Has a Bangladeshi mayor who's a Republican who has endorsed Trump. He's had Trump come. And so then you see kind of that opposite journey of the immigrants here who are going conservative in their voting preferences. But I'm still guessing, I could be wrong, but I'm guessing that a lot of these are still going to be voting for Harris because we're in basically a bipolar choice. Yeah. Do you take the man who's sided with Netanyahu, or do you take one who doesn't have a great plan? There is no great plan, unfortunately, but at least seems to align more with how their values align.
Well,
So
I
that's
think
what's-
I think I specifically remember. I know during the debate, I think I think Trump called Biden, like, he used Palestinian as like an insult.
Yeah.
Like he was like they're I think it was like they're calling him a Palestinian. He's being a bad Palestinian or something. It was a very it. I don't know. It's been interesting. There's still been a lot of these kind of. I think on Saturday when Kamala Harris made her appearance on SNL, there was a crowd of people outside SNL protesting her. There was a video of her motorcade driving by onto Rockefeller Plaza, and there was a really big crowd there, people waving Palestinian flags and stuff like that. And so you did steal my next question about whether those voters end up voting for Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
I believe it was CARE that put out a poll the other day, and it's when you a lot of demographics they're so hard to poll.
Yeah.
When like only like I think it's 1.4% of the American population are Muslim.
Yeah.
But it was Jill Stein had 42%, Kamala Harris had 40%, and I think Donald Trump was at 10%.
Okay.
And so no, but that's super interesting. Jill Stein has a lot. The DNC, I think they ran an ad on during football, I think it was during a football game. I can't remember,
Yeah.
but I know it was in Pennsylvania and Michigan. It started with a picture of Jill Stein and it faded into a picture of Donald Trump. Do you think that works? Do you think that's giving free rein name recognition to Jill Stein, or do you think it's an effective kind of scare tactic to say if you vote for her, you're voting for Trump?
I think it works for some. I think one of the reasons I think many people get turned off in politics is it becomes so negative and so scare tactic. SNL had a great skit last week, and you mentioned them with Harris and made a guest appearance. They had a great skit who named that person. Tim Kaine showed up, and they're like, name this person. And everyone's like, and it's funny how quickly we forget about Tim Kaine, especially on the national scale. We might know him a little bit in Virginia. But in 2016, the Democrats said democracy's on the line. This is the most important election ever. What do we see the messaging again in 2024? Democracy's on the line. This is the most important election ever. So I think the scare tactics turn off a lot of young voters who aren't engaged in politics yet because they just see it as divisive, negative things like this. So I think that'll work for some. And to me, the Palestinian Americans, the Arab Americans, the Muslim Americans, if Gaza is your number one issue, you have to, I think, look at the two main candidates if you want to make a difference, right? You live in Virginia, you live in California, Texas, well, it doesn't really matter. But if you live in Michigan, you have to look at that and say, okay, this is my number one issue, this is my number two, this is my number three. Which one of these candidates who has a chance to win is going to be better for me overall? And I have to think that's where they're going to come to the solution. I'm sure you'll have some, I don't mean to disparage all you 18-year-olds out there, but I'm sure you'll have some younger folks who probably still do vote for Jill Stein out of her protest vote. But I think when you look at the holistic picture, and if inflation, if immigration, if healthcare, climate change, if these are issues that matter to you, I think you have to look at these holistically. And so that's what I believe a lot of these voters. It's very easy in the Democratic primary to vote uncommitted.
Yeah.
What am I losing?
And I think there was a thing the other day. It was one of those Jubilee debates that people watch. It's like the 25v1, and it was Pete Buttigieg was talking to undecided voters in Michigan, and there was one person there, and she said, "I'm undecided between do I vote for Jill Stein or do I vote for Kamala Harris?" And kind of the response that a lot of people had was, well, a vote for Jill Stein is a vote for Donald Trump. But continuously, if you point out, a lot of the times if you point out to people that are kind of the undecided between am I voting Democrat or am I going to vote for a Jill Stein, Claudia de la Cruz, the socialist candidate, a lot of the time, the response is well, Donald Trump is going to do this. Donald Trump's a lot worse, and they're like, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump. I'm thinking about voting for these two candidates. Do you think telling people from the Democratic point, if a Democrat was to tell those people, this is why Trump is bad, do you think that's effective?
No. I don't, because I think, especially because we have the history with Trump. I mean, no matter if you voted for him or not, right? We all, of age, even all of you in this room are of age to remember him as president here. And were there a lot of things that probably a lot of us didn't like? Yeah. But did we continue to function as a country? Did we continue to move forward? Did life continue on? Did a new day start? Yes. And so I don't think that strategy, You think about it as a kid. Well, don't do that. What do you immediately want to do that, right? So I don't think it's a great strategy on the Democrats to equate it all there. I think we need hope and change, right? I think that's one of the reasons Barack Obama was such a refreshing face, because he talked about what he was going to do to make it better. And I think we've lost that a little bit since Trump's gone on the ballot here. And I think you saw that with Clinton, even a little bit with Biden, and we see it again with Harris, where it's all about why that person's so bad instead of why you should vote for me, and where's the inspiration. And so I think Harris has switched. I was interesting. I don't know. Did you see any of the ads were you watching football yesterday?
I was.
Did you see any of the Trump and Harris ads? They were running over and over and over again.
Yeah, there's a Harris ad where she talks about the enemies list versus to-do list, and I think I saw it 4 times.
Yeah.
Not seeing quite as many ads for the presidential race as I am for the mayor of Richmond race, which I can't vote in, and so I am tired of seeing their faces on my television. But the same ads keep running over. I think I saw one. Rob Whitman ran one against his House opponent about in the first district in Virginia about school resource officers.
Yes.
And it played. There was like a Hardee's commercial or something, I can't remember. And then it was that ad again, and it was like I don't care. I don't vote in that district.
I had to look up who that was because I had no idea who Rob Whitman was. I don't vote in that district either.
Used to be my representative.
Okay. And so I had to look it up. I will say the one thing I did notice about both the Harris and Trump ads, right? If you take them in a vacuum yesterday, I thought they were much more positive, much more about what each candidate could bring to the table, right? Trump was talking about security, peace, prosperity. And so I think if you took the ads I saw yesterday over and over again, but if you took those in a vacuum, I thought they were, to me, what works as a more effective motivational strategy. Was there still, the enemies list, but again, Harris then talked about lowering saving Social Security, et cetera, et cetera. So I personally, out of both candidates, would want to see more, here's what I can do, here's why you should support me. But clearly, the people who get paid a lot more money to do this think differently than I do.
Yeah. And so the closing argument that you think they're making, what have you seen that closing argument kind of, do you think, which closing argument do you think has been more effective?
It's interesting. The Trump's closing argument, you can start in the garbage man outfit here, right? Clearly here's the thing about President Trump. He understands what his hardcore supporters want and gives them what they want, right? He is entertainment to the T, and like his hardcore base knows him, eats it up, and wants more of it. He's done a fabulous job of appealing to them. The problem, I think, as I see it for him, is he widened his base. Has he made women feel more secure, more comfortable voting for him? Has he made other groups that, Gen Z, things like that? No. So I think he's doubled down. It's interesting, he and his campaign are talking a little about early voting. Obviously, in the past, they've not encouraged that. Yeah. They've switched their tone on that a little bit. So I think he's been very effective motivating his base and getting them fired up. I think Harris has also been very good at motivating her base. But it's funny, is you wouldn't think right now we'd be talking about, but this freaking comedian, Tony Hinchcliffe, right? Oh, Lord. I don't know how that cut through all the noise out there, but there was NPR was in Reading, Pennsylvania today, which is 75% Latino and like 55,000 Puerto Ricans, people of Puerto Rican descent, and yet this is still a talking point here. So I think in some ways we're going to see this late break towards Harris, and it really has nothing to do with what Trump said or what Harris said. It's what occurred at that Madison Square Garden rally. Yeah. So I also think Harris was very interesting on the eclipse, right? 75,000 turned out to kind of have that speech. And I do find it interesting the Democrats have really co-opted the freedom narrative. Traditionally, that was a Republican campaign selling point.
Well, the Beyonce song, too. I mean, freedom.
That's true. Great point. But I think it's interesting that it's become a Democratic point this year, where historically, in my youth, George Bush, Ronald Reagan, right, they were about the candidate of freedom, and now we see that on the other thing. So I think both candidates have done a good job speaking to their base. I think maybe Harris has widened her base slightly at the end, but honestly, I could be wrong, but this Puerto Rico thing seems to be sticking more than we've seen anything stick in a while.
And so I'm going to ask you my last question for you, and it's the key question.
Okay.
Who do you think is going to win? What's your prediction for tomorrow night?
My prediction was we'll know nothing tomorrow night. That's prediction number one.
Very fair point.
I don't know. So all the polling, right, indicates that we think Trump's going to win, right? You had some polling earlier. Pennsylvania, he's up slightly. Of course, the margin in error in all the polling points is usually plus three or 4 points. So all these are essentially tied races here where Trump goes up 3, Harris goes up 3. That would be what the polls have predicted. And if you think about it, if you are a pollster, it's pretty nice to build yourself in a margin of error. So you could say, hey, look, I was right.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? I was right. Of course I was right. So the polling would indicate to me that President Trump is going to win, right? Because he's up in Georgia, he's up in North Carolina, he's up in Arizona, Nevada, and Pennsylvania, and then she's up in Michigan and Wisconsin here. So that is probably the rational side of me says. The polls in 2016, 2020, and 2022, as you mentioned, were all wrong. So if I'm a betting man, I'm not going to bet a lot of money, but I'm going to bet a few dollars on Harris winning because I think you're going to see the young people turn out. You've seen early returns on mail-in voting be much more female. And the other thing we haven't talked about, and of course I could delay this thing forever, is this whole idea of women voting secretly against what their husbands think they're going to vote. Mm-hmm. I don't know if this phenomenon's real, but I find it very, very fascinating. So I think between the women vote, the Gen Z vote, I think you're going to see Harris win. The other thing I think is fascinating is North Carolina. Mm-hmm. The Republican candidate for governor is a hot mess.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering what's going to happen in North Carolina. Are Republicans going to stay home because they don't want to deal with that and then cost Trump some votes? Or are Republicans going to potentially vote Harris, or are they going to vote Trump? Who's the Democrat?
Josh Stein.
Josh Stein. Are they going to mix, are we going to have split tickets, which we don't have a lot in this country anymore? So my very cautious small dollar bet is Harris is going to win.
Okay, well, I'd clip that. Well, thank you so much for your time. When we come back, we're going to talk about what's on the ballot, what to look for when results start coming in, and how to vote if you've not done so yet. We will be right back with the In Case You Missed It election special. Welcome back to the Rotunda's In Case You Missed It Election Eve special. Thank you to Dr. Stouffer for joining us. We've talked a lot today about what's going on across the nation, but what about here at home in Farmville? What's on the ballot here? Well, it depends where you are, even in Farmville. If you live in Virginia and are registered here, you'll have at least 4 elections on the ballot. You're looking at the same... So what Virginians are going to end up voting on is going to be the presidential election result, the Senate race, the House race, and and the Constitutional Amendment. So the Constitutional Amendment extends property tax exemptions to the spouses of soldiers who have died in the line of duty. You can also see Virginians have 4 third-party candidates to vote for if they choose for president, though historically third-party candidates do not receive more than 2% or so in Virginia. However, while the candidates are the same for the presidential race in all of Virginia, this isn't what the ballot looks like everywhere in Virginia. If you live in the town of Farmville, you'll have town council races to vote on. If you live somewhere like Richmond, you'll have a hotly contested mayoral race to vote on. As of today, 2,293,043 people have already voted in Virginia, according to the latest Virginia Public Access Project data. If you put that in perspective, that is over 711 Longwoods or 480 Farmvilles. That said, if you're not one of those 2,293,043 people, you still have 1 day left to vote. These 4 resources are great for those who still need to vote. The Virginia Department of Elections has resources for college students, as well as how to do a same-day voter registration. Furthermore, there is also a site to make sure you have the right polling location and a link to the Virginia Department of Elections site to check your registration. Feel free to scan or screenshot those resources. Remember that items for the Virginia Department of Elections are typically only relevant for those who registered in Virginia, and if you live out of state, you need to consult with election officials in that state. We're going to take one more quick break, and then we'll be back with what to look for on election night and some other quick thoughts. And for the last time, welcome back to our Election Eve Live special, and congratulations! Just over 24 hours from now, the political ads and texts will have stopped, and you can settle in and do one of 2 things. You can flip on the results and wait, or think about anything but the election and find out in the morning. If you plan on doing option 2, I do greatly envy you. However, for the rest of us on election night, results will begin coming in fast and furious around 8 p.m. Polls close in Virginia at 7 p.m., but it will take a little while for results to actually come in. What is important to remember while results come in is that not all counties and places are created equally. For example, take Virginia's 2020 results. Biden won by around 10%. This county, Halifax, voted for Donald Trump. It's a fairly large county, but only has around 33,000 people. This county, on the other hand, Arlington, has 234,000 and voted for Joe Biden. Despite being a much smaller county, it has far more voters. Here's some counties to watch if you want to figure out patterns early. Hamilton, Indiana closes early and is a great place to note any movement in the suburbs which have swung against Donald Trump as of recent. Bucks and Erie are bellwether Pennsylvania counties, and obviously Pennsylvania is one of the most hotly contested and one of the most important states on the map. Orange, Florida, which hosts Orlando, hosts a robust Puerto Rican population and will indicate if there's any backlash to the comments about Puerto Rico at Trump's Madison Square Garden rally. Here are poll closing times for tomorrow. Feel free to screenshot. As you can see, Virginia closes at 7 p.m. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to go out and vote and watch our Instagram tomorrow for live updates. My name is Tyler Badgett. Good night.